Hello and welcome back. Another edition of Coach's Corner. Today is a day that I've been looking forward to for quite some time. Oftentimes, with my emails or my direct messages, I get asked questions pertaining to mental health, which I am absolutely not certified, nor should I offer any thoughts or advice. When I do, I speak solely as a parent that has gone through a process. But I thought today we would invite a guest that is uniquely qualified with regard to both the sport of baseball at the higher levels as well as a doctorate and a doctor within the mental health industry, working with the University of Alabama. Dr. Bhrett McCabe, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me, Coach. Let's see what we got here.
And I really find it fascinating over the last year when I've had the pleasure and the opportunity to speak with you via the Twitter Space platform. I have a lot of parents that continuously go down that line of questioning, but I obviously, as I previously stated, am unqualified. The first question that a lot of parents have been submitting recently is, at what age do parents become aware, or should they become aware, of the mindset / mental health component of these young athletes starting as young as, let's say, 10 or 12 years old?
It's a good question. I think the mental health domain that we're in. I mean, listen, we're in a very contentious time across this country with the mental health demands upon our youth. That's becoming earlier and earlier. For all the benefits that social media has, there are also some dangers associated with it. And it adults youth very fast, because there's really not a filter, and the conversations can be very suggestive and progressive and moving individuals into an older domain. And it doesn't mean I'm necessarily saying they're in a predatory situation, but what I mean is that the nature of conversations are much older than people who are typically, maybe like you and I, would watch TV when we were kids, or we would, the amount of material that we were exposed to is much less. And, I can remember being 10 or 11, walking in a movie theater and seeing a rated R movie, but, you peek in, but then you walk on. Well, that's on a daily basis, bombarding them. And so as a result, what's happening is we're taking our youth generation and we're putting them into environments where performance is a standard, right? And performance is pushing them harder, and performance is wanting more out of them. But their load management is not prepared for this. Okay, so it'd be like taking a truck off of an assembly line that doesn't have all the support and the shocks and the struts and the wheels and all that, and then we're saying them to go carry the same load as something that has been refined and is a multi-ton truck. And so while it looks good and it works, it doesn't have the supports behind it. And that's what happens with our youth. Now we take them and put them in a sports environment, and we're asking them to perform. We're holding them to standards of what we see other people do. We're saying, well, why aren't you like these players that are already in the major leagues? And, those kids at 15 were All-Americans and all this other stuff. And your 12, 14-year-old is on a different developmental path. Maybe a late bloomer, maybe somebody who has a delayed experience, maybe somebody who hasn't moved to the pitcher's mound yet because they're playing in the outfield, but they don't have the arm strength yet to go on the mound. And so they haven't found that confidence and that swagger. And so you're dealing with a very fragile environment. And what's happening is that mental health demand is pushing further and further and younger and younger. I saw a statistic a couple of days ago talking about what I think it's the American Psychological Association request or demand recommendation is for every 500 students in a high school or a school, there's one psychologist. The numbers, though, in the United States are approaching one for every 1,200 students. And that's impossible for a student counselor, school counselor, to be able to manage, right? So then what do we do is we know from our generation that sports has a very buoyant effect. It helps us, it teaches us, but it's hard, right? It's difficult. And now we're shrinking schedules, and players have more demands. And if you ask most kids where they eat most of their meals, it's in the car seat. It's in the car, it's moving in between. They're not having those decompression times. And then I've argued for a long time, and any teacher that's listening to this, you can send me a message and fuss at me. But I think the amount of homework that our students take is absolutely obscene and obnoxious. It's a reflection of trying to catch up for a finish line that's moving further and further away. And as a result, our kids come home from practice and then they got 3 hours of work. And what happens? Teachers say, I don't give 3 hours of work, but 6 teachers give 30 minutes apiece, and there we go. And so as a result, it builds and it builds and it builds. And so the thing that is important there is that people understand that the demand of our student athletes, and when we as parents love our kids so much that we want them to do as well as they possibly can, and we can give them every resource possible. And then, the kids also understand, they know that parents are putting in all this time and effort. And many parents are 2 and 3 kids, and they're doing this across 2 and they're stressed and tired and worn out. The kids sponge it, they bring it in and they internalize it. And so you've got this just snowball effect that's happening. So when do we work on the mental health? Let's start this. Let's take a look at this from a tiered approach. Number one, it starts in the home. Okay. And what that means is creating environments at home that's not always competitive. I am an absolute believer of a competitive environment. I am a believer that kids need to have things and learn the skills to achieve them. If not, then the world will pass them by at times, right? Until they find it themselves. So I think they need to be in those environments. But it has to come from the parents, and the parents have to do a good job of limiting and also creating the right perspectives around the home. Meaning, this is what's expected and anticipated. This is how we're going to do it. These are the things that we're going to do, right? And it's okay. I love you either way. And I know when people say, tell them you love them when you get in the car. Okay, that's one thing. But showing it,
right,
and verbalizing it and being there for them and changing the subject, that's sometimes more powerful than, I love to watch you play, but you did this, this, and this, and dad's mad and won't say anything for the next 2-hour ride because he's pissed that the kid missed a fastball down the middle, right? And we have to be careful of those implicit actions. Number two is, what are the systems that are in place to help us? And we can't expect our school programs, our travel ball organizations to have the best mindset. They're scrambling for people, volunteers. Look, we have an umpire shortage in this world, right? So, people aren't going from umpiring to being counselors. The amount of people that are available. I remember when I moved to Baton Rouge in 8th grade, we had a wonderful CYO program led by a gentleman by the name of Denny Bro. That was his job. It was a Catholic youth organization, and it was a comprehensive program. But we didn't practice 6 days a week. I mean, we practiced maybe 2.5, 3 days. And so it's that. And then I think the last part is the individual team. That's the top of it, which is the organizational structure and the interest of a coach to understand that at every level, the mental health of their player needs to be a primary. It's not competing with strategy. Listen, coach, it's not going to take away your cuts in the cage or your bunt defense. You spend an hour a week working on bunt defenses that you'll never freaking use. Talk to your kids. Okay. I've been there with bunt defenses. I mean, I remember my high school, we had 8 bunt defenses. I don't think we ever used any. Went to LSU, we had one, right? And it flexed between where the ball went. I mean, it was simple, but my coach, Coach Bertman, he was brilliant. He would walk around the outfield and talk to guys. Like, he would just talk. Hey, how are you doing? You doing okay? Hey, listen, I got a call from your, professor and said this is going on. And so make sure you're okay there. Like, and we weren't like, oh, great, coach is coming over here. But it was, the line of like, all right, that's what we're doing. So I think, to answer your question, is it pushing down? Yes, we have to, as the adults in the room, we have to prepare our kids for it, because if not, our kids are going to be walking around with tremendous amount of burden on their back.
I'm going to slip an additional question in here because you brought up a subject matter, and I want to bring some things to parents' attention. Dr. Bhrett played arguably at the highest level of amateur baseball with regard to pitching in Omaha in June for LSU. And you kind of just threw out there that late bloomer mentally and physically. And I know that you've talked with me in the past, and you've kind of told, not only myself, but listeners, your story. And I think it's important for parents to gain some perspective as to the term late bloomer, and understand that whether your son is at 10, an elite athlete, or 17, you still will end up at the right place for your son, regardless of when you blossom as a person and as an athlete. Could you just share that briefly with parents as far as your story?
Yeah, so you bring up a great point, and particularly in today's world, there was a great book written by Malcolm Gladwell years ago called Outliers, and it looked at the youth hockey world and looking at the world hockey rosters. Most of the kids were born in January, February, March, and that was because the cutoff was December 31st. So you got the oldest in the front. A 12-year-old boy has a lot of variety in it. A 12-year-old 11 month and a 12-year-old 1 month. That's a long time. I mean, you're talking little less than 10% of their overall developmental is in that 1 year. I didn't grow until my senior year in high school. I played 1 year varsity baseball. Um, we had moved around a lot when I was a kid. My dad was in the military, and he was a college baseball player. He was a catcher, and he knew what he was doing. The guy was really, really savvy on what he was doing. But and he was very invested in development and knowing how things worked and things like that. And so when I went to high school, I went to an all boys Catholic school, very great school in Baton Rouge, had a very legacy baseball program. And, I made the junior varsity my sophomore year. We really didn't have a freshman program. I played with a different freshman team. Come to find out, there was a freshman program that I missed. And that freshman program put me behind. So I go out for junior varsity and I played and I did stuff, but there were older guys that were there. I mean, I want to say I was 15 and there were sophomores that had already turned 16. Right. And so not only was I behind the developmental path, I was behind the developmental path, the age path, and the skill set path. Right. And so I played a little bit. And then going into my junior year, they held me back to play on the junior varsity again, my junior year. And that allowed me to play summer ball with the juniors, freshmen and sophomores, and play down, which was very helpful for me. I went in and played my senior year, and I was the number 3 pitcher on our squad. We had a kid who was really, really highly recruited. And then we had an older kid in my graduating class as well. But he ended up not being able to play due to a medical illness. And so I moved up to the number 2 guy. The kid that was much better than me was much, much better than me. I had a lot of talent, but I didn't have a lot of execution. And I was very fortunate. He went to Mississippi State. And my coach told me at the time, he's like, look, he's going to go there, but not play a lot because he's capped out. He maxed out in high school, but he was so heads and shoulders above everybody in high school. He's dominating, but his ability to transfer to the next level is going to be very limited unless he has a really savvy pitching coach that's going to help him. He said, you're the opposite. He said, I feel like I've got somebody who has all the weapons and the tools, but doesn't know how to use any of them. And so if you come in here and spend a couple of years and redshirt and then learn your sophomore year, then maybe your third year, you'll be ready to play. And he was right. And that's exactly what happened. And I ended up getting injured my third year. And so I played predominantly my fourth and fifth year. But my coach was correct. And so it took a longer developmental path. I think one of the things that we forget as coaches and as parents is that we're constantly trying to predict the future, right?
Amen.
We're constantly trying to predict what this kid will do. And I remember talking to a recruiting coordinator in the SEC who I have a lot of respect for. We were talking about one of my old teammates' kids, and he said, Brett, he just ain't got it. And I was like, he's a freshman in high school. But I get it. Vandy very well, LSU, South Carolina, Arkansas, in the SEC, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, right? When you look at the college baseball realm, the SEC of today is a hell of a lot better than it was when I played. I mean, look, we were the best baseball conference in baseball, but I look at what LSU's doing right now, bringing in the top 5 transfers. They just boom. You've got 5 first rounders sitting on that squad. You got Dylan Cruz will be the number 1 or 2 pick in the draft as a center fielder. You've got the kid that transferred in from Air Force. You've got Tommy White from North Carolina. It's just like, okay. Yeah. And so but what people have to understand is that there are hundreds of baseball programs out there. And I know parents and all of us have the dream. Like, I live in Alabama, and parents will come to me and like, my dream is for my kid to play at Auburn, Alabama. And I'm like, I get that. But their recruiting footprint is national and sometimes international. And you're competing on very limited roster spots. Go in today's game in the transfer portal, you have the right to transfer. Great players will find the place they want to go to. Go to a place where you're going to find people who can develop you, can give you the platform to play against people that you can play against and grow. There is no predictor. Yes, a kid could go to Vandy and under Coach Corbin, and we can look at that and say the odds of him getting drafted at this level are very high because of track record. But you could also go to, you know, buddy Jeremy Scheetinger's place over at
Right.
GGU,
Gwinnett. Yep.
yeah, and Gwinnett, and go down there and get. I mean, listen to what he's doing. Okay, that's a historically what's it, NAIA or is that D3?
That's NAI. Yep.
Yep, putting up great baseball. I've watched the videos. The kids are very talented kids, right? You just need a place to play, and you need somebody. Scouts will find them, and you know what? If you go down there and you average 42 bombs a year, guess who's going to find you in a summer league? Okay, it's not that hard, y'all. But what we do is people, and I get it. Like I get it. Like I couldn't have played at LSU today. Like I know that. I know that. But that's okay. That's okay. If I take a look at like college basketball, right? I mean, who made a choice that Gonzaga was going to be one of the top teams in the country for the last decade?
Right.
That program developed kids and got players in there, right? Go play. And I see this all the time. Kids come in, they get buried on a roster, they go somewhere else and they flourish. And guess what? They move up. You know what? You don't have to. It's okay to not go to the Division I SEC school in the top 10 right out of high school. If you do, awesome. Okay, fight like hell and find a way to get out there and play. But it's hard. I mean, it's and I get it. I get it. And now, and I'll also say this. I think the way the draft is running now and them limiting minor league teams and things, college is the place to go. And unless you're first or second round draft pick and you're getting a lot of money and you're going to a team and an organization that has a track record of developing players and can grow a player up through their system and you have support at every level, go to college. Because I was having this conversation with one of my college basketball players and we were talking about NIL. And everybody wants to talk about NIL, whatever. And he said, look, now it's better to stay in college and go play in Europe. For a long time, what would do is kids would go play in Europe because they'd make $200,000, $300,000 a year. And when they're struggling in the college, and let's say they're not just, they're getting their degree, but they're there to play basketball. Like, I mean, it's okay. We want to get them to learn, skills and things like that. But when they're, let's say at Alabama, okay, in Tuscaloosa, we have number 4 team in the country in college basketball. Brilliant head coach in Nate Oates. Unbelievable player development up and down the roster. You have one of the best strength coaches, Henry Barrera, there. You have one of the finest athletic trainers I've ever worked with in basketball, and Clark Holter there. You've got 15 guys, men and women, working behind the scenes on player development, breaking down film. You've got massage therapists. You've got the best orthopedic surgeons in the world at Andrews Clinic right around the corner. You've got one of the best foot and ankle surgeons in the world who comes to the games and sits on the sidelines to watch. He was a former college basketball at UVA player. And if you need something, they're there. You've got great food with chefs working there. You fly private. You've got development. You've got people like me who all they need to do is tell the trainer, hey, I need to see Bhrett, or they call me directly at their disposal. When they turn pro, this, I'm charging them. Right? I mean, okay, they're paying that. And I know that some of my professional athletes pay over $1 million a year for their team. So, they may make 10 million a year, but they're paying $1 million in what they're doing. And so when you start looking at that and it's like, wait a minute, I can stay in college and get development and grow. Maybe that's not a bad spot. And so what this player was telling me is like, look, we got some kids that could be maybe just outside the lottery, but maybe it's better for them to stay, dominate another year, get another year older, put on 15 pounds of muscle, utilize every resource here, love the college experience. I mean, this player was telling me, he's like, man, because I wasn't expecting to whatever. He goes, I've been going to basketball games, the women's basketball, I went to volleyball, I went to soccer. He's like, I'm having the time of my life. He's like, and I said, hey, you know what you're doing if you're playing in the G League? You ain't doing that. And so parents, let the kids, we may want them to go to Bama or Auburn or LSU or Mississippi State or UCLA or, whatever. Let them go to where they feel at home, where they're getting their development. Long answer there, Coach, but you know me, I'm going to give you
No, I think it's great because you answered a bunch of questions within that. And I think it's important for parents to understand a sense of being wanted, a sense of being accepted. Don't try to force yourself into a place or a school that might want you, that might need you. Really listen to who is, really wanting you to show up on their campus and be a part of their program. I think that's an important, integral part of recruiting.
Yep.
And I think
And
that gets lost.
and parents, don't get your feelings hurt if they
Right.
tell you that your role this year, the kids' role this year is going to be limited. Like, wow, my kid's better than so and so. Okay, but the coach doesn't trust them yet. Well, if they get the opportunity, they will. Well, they're not doing it in practice. Okay, you have to understand what coaches look for. Like, everybody thinks that they're just going to show up. So I got an idea here. Okay, I think we can all play flight simulators, or
Right.
we can all play Call of Duty.
Right.
But I'm going to take you now and I'm going to put you over there and let's tell you how you're going to do. Okay. That's the equivalent to not as much tragic circumstance. What I mean by that is that players don't get better under pressure. Okay. Pressure breaks down everybody. Now, there are a few people who may see a jump in adrenaline, which helps them fine tune their pitch, velocity and their location. But guess what? You also have hitters with adrenaline who now that fastball that is going from 88 is going to 92, but it flattens out and it moves towards the center of the plate. Yeah, have fun with that.
Right.
Okay. And so the thing about it is if a coach comes to them, and this is a thing that I hit coaches hard with, is that coaches get afraid to share their plan with players because they're afraid they're going to lose them emotionally. If somebody said, look, Bhrett, you're going to pitch, and Skip used to do this, look, you're, if possible, for the next 3 months. Okay. And if possible, is if we have a lead, I'd like to get you some innings because I'd like to move you to if needed. Then I'd like to move you into this is your role. Okay. He had a progression. If possible meant if we were up or down by like 8 to 9 runs and the game was out of, then I got the chance to pitch. Okay. Now, let's be honest. That's hard to go to 72 games. It's hard to go to practice and all that. But who was I going to beat out? Like, who was now? Let's say I go in there and all of a sudden, if possible, and I start doing well, and then I find something, and velocity picks up. I start doing well. Then I move to if needed, and then he puts me in a tough game. And I do well. Next thing you know, it could be the SEC tournament, and I'm a guy coming out of the bullpen who's got 20 innings, but I've found something. That happens all the time in baseball, basketball, football. Happens all the time. But what happens is players, climb the ladder by focusing on the things that they can do. And as parents need to understand that if coaches, and this is why the parent coaching dynamic happens and it goes bad, is that nobody's willing to say what needs to be said because everybody's afraid to upset somebody because I don't want to upset the recruiting line. I don't want people to talk bad about me. Look, you want to talk bad about somebody, go for it. Okay. But as a coach, if you have told a player, Bhrett, you will not play for 2 years. This is what I need you to do. I need you to immerse yourself in the data and the understanding. Get in that weight room, lean up, get stronger. And I don't do it, then I can't blame coach.
Correct.
Okay. But what happens is coaches don't ever say it like that. They kind of give vague generalities, and then the player does some of it and then just doesn't understand why they're not playing. And so you're better off to sit with somebody and say, look, I want to try to get you some innings. Okay. Now, remember, I'm also trying to get innings of other players too. There was a moment. It actually happened at Arkansas, and my senior year, we go to Arkansas, coach. That I was the number one guy to come out of the bullpen. First inning, ninth inning, it didn't matter. I could get out of any jam in the world. I had this Houdini-like experience, and if I went through the SEC roster, if I went through the lineup in one day more than one time, I usually would be at risk because I had some funky stuff. Okay. But the Friday night game, pitcher throws a complete game. Saturday game gets rained out, so we have to place 2 7-inning games on Sunday. Those suck, but we had to do that. It was about 39 degrees. It was raining, and our bullpen was underwater, so we had to warm up in the Arkansas bullpen. This is in their old stadium. And I think it's like 3-2 in the fourth inning. And I'm starting, like, my engines are priming. Like, this is my game, right? I'm trying to stay warm, whatever. And then all of a sudden he sends our lefty to the bullpen, our freshman lefty. And the kid's name was Eddie Arnell. And Eddie Arnell pitched for the Yankees in the major leagues and pitched overseas. He was a good kid, really good player. And and I remember just like getting kicked in the solar plexus or further south of that. And I was so ticked off. And I remember just eating my insides. And Eddie goes and warms up, comes in the game, gets us out of a jam, and then as soon as he goes in the game, they send me to the bullpen. And I'm like, oh, so bad. And then we blew it open, and now I had to throw, right? Because it's the end of the game. I've gone through an SEC weekend. I haven't pitched yet. And so coach puts me in to throw the seventh inning. I think, I mean, we're up like 9, right, to finish the game. And I pitched like crap, gave up a yard ball, struggled to get through the inning, gave up a couple runs, whatever. And I got done. I was so ticked. And I remember our pitching coach came up to us, and our pitching coach really wasn't the X's and O's guys. He was more of like a teacher. He was more of a support guy. He was like, Bhrett, what the hell was that? And I was like, why did he put an Eddie ahead of me? Like, that's my job. And after me, acting like an idiot and spoiled brat for a little while, Cano eventually said, the pitching coach said, dude, you didn't get it, did you? He said, we have got to get a third starter developed before the postseason. And Eddie is a major league pitcher. Okay. The kid's going to pitch in the major leagues. We need him to pitch later in the season. If we put you in and then put him in when it was an 8-run lead and he struggled, who would come in relief of him? If we put him in and then put you in, you were there to fix his mistake and it wouldn't crush him. But you were so caught up in not being in the moment, you tanked yourself. And he outshined you. And that was a big wake-up call for me because he was right. As a coach, they had a plan, and I didn't know what the plan was, right? I mean, they should have told me, and I would have been like, yeah, okay, that's cool. Like, I'm ready to go. And maybe a mistake. Maybe I got caught up in the moment, but I didn't handle that. I mean, I was a fifth-year senior. I should have known better than that.
Well, what I want to make sure that I get across to parents and student athletes that find their way here to listen to Dr. McCabe, first thing I want to do before I go into my last question, I'm going to give you a list of books, and they're going to be in the bottom of the video with regard to how to order the books. But do yourself a favor as a parent. Break Free from Suckville. As a dad, that's a book written by Dr. Bhrett McCabe. As a dad, when I read that book, a light bulb went off in my head. It made me a better dad. It made me a better coach. More importantly, it offered perspective that I had just been totally oblivious to for probably my entire life. So when you're listening to Dr. McCabe tell you these stories, please take into consideration he's lived it. And that's the unique perspective. The parents of student athletes need to understand what is going on in a dugout, in a locker room, on a practice field, in the heat of battle in big games. And so those are the types of situations that Dr. McCabe has lived. So that's what gives him the ability to share with athletes in all sports. And so my one question that I know parents would want me to follow up with and end with, today's world of youth sports, over and above baseball, the travel ball world, AAU world, and now it is carried over into the transfer portal, where in the youth sport dynamic, Dr. McCabe, it's customer service. It's return on investment. I don't get what I feel I'm paying for. I'm going to go to a different program. Now in college athletics, I'm not getting what I expected. And so I want to hit that transfer portal. Do you feel we're losing the competitive edge and the life lessons that you've learned and are sharing with us here today, being on that bottom of the bottom rung of the ladder and watching and having to work towards opportunities between the lines? Do you think we've lost that now with the portal?
No, what the transfer portal to me, I actually think the transfer portal is a wonderful thing because it gives players who may have a psychological struggle at a certain spot the opportunity to transfer gracefully. Okay. And listen, the reason I'm saying that is you're taking a 17 to 18-year-old kid and asking them where they're going to spend the next 4 years of their life. Okay. They can't even pick where they want to go to dinner sometimes. And so we're asking them to go to a place, move away, integrate with 25 to 50 to 70 new people, be liked by everybody, feel home, not be homesick. Okay, so I'm big on the transfer portal. My experience is that about 85% of the people who enter the transfer portal are entering because there's a reason that they are struggling in the where they're at. And whether it's they're not aware of their developmental path, they're not on the same page with the coaching and development, they're not happy, there's something. Like there's a reason why they're leaving. About 10 to 15% will up move. And those are the ones that you see like if Tyler, your son, if he was pitching at Monmouth, okay, and then all of a sudden hitting 98 on the gun, and Vandy called and said, "Hey, we want you to come down here, and here's our NIL deal." That would have been an up move. Like the Monmouth coach would have gone, "Dude, I totally get it, man. I mean, you got to jump and do this." Like the kid that I heard about that's at LSU that came from Air Force Academies, and his last name is Skoll. I mean, the kid is 98 on the mound, hitting 450 as a catcher, and he's at the Air Force Academy. Like the kid and he's 6'100". I mean, he looks like he's built like a Greek god. I mean, I've saw him walking. Okay, my dad was 20 years Air Force. I am all about the Air Force. That kid does not need to be in the Air Force. That kid needs to be on a diamond somewhere. So you go to a place where you can do that. And so I think the transfer portal highlights the need for coaches to lay out plans for players. Because if you have a kid who comes in who's a freshman and you're like, "Oh, man, not as good as I thought," okay? Sometimes it's, not as good as I thought, doesn't do the work, is resistant to coaching, and is probably going to bail. Transfer is a great place for them, okay? That's a minority. The reality is sometimes you get a kid that comes in who's like, they need to get better because they're not as good as I thought. But listen, here's the plan, okay? And if you tell a player the plan, and that player goes, "Yeah, I don't want to do that," then you know exactly who you need in your program and who you don't need.
Right.
Okay, it's not that hard. But if you tell a kid, like, "Look, you're not strong enough to play here," that's the weight room. Grab the GA and do extra work. And that kid comes back in the right way and is 30 pounds heavier with muscle. Yeah, there we go. Okay. There we go. That kid is eating steel to be a part of your program. And that happened. The kid that hit the home run in the bottom of the ninth inning, the year after I was done playing at LSU, Warren Morris, beat Miami in the ninth inning home run. That's all over. He's got the statue outside of Omaha.
Oh, yeah.
That's what he did. Okay. Warren went and got in the gym. He wasn't going to play in front of my roommate. And he got in the gym and he spent time. My freshman year, I worked out 5 days a week. Okay. Because I knew the plan. Coaches, give them the plan. Don't just be like, "Yeah, they're sitting on the bench and they're in the third station of batting practice, third group, which is our scrubs." Those, you know what I mean? Like, I can't stand when coaches say, "It's the middle of the season. I don't have time for the lower guys on my roster." BS. That's a weakness. That's a inefficiency that you don't know how to coach the players at every single player on the roster. One thing I learned, there was a basketball coach I worked with at Alabama who I'm an absolute massive fan of. His name is Anthony Grant. And he had the number one team in the country at University of Dayton. They would have won the national title, no doubt in my mind, when COVID hit. And he's having to, at a place like Dayton, you have to retool a lot more than an SEC team. So the last couple of years have been a little bit tougher. But Anthony was the greatest developer of humans I've ever been around. And he would coach the walk-ons with the same intensity as his 5-star McDonald's All-American. And the reason was that the kid was on his roster. I mean,
amen.
The kid was there. And I remember going to a practice when I first started working with him, and I was like, told the trainer, I'm like, "Whoa, who is that kid?" He goes, "That's one of our practice players." In college basketball, they have a practice squad, right? He was working. The kid, it wasn't like the kid was disrespecting. I mean, it had nothing to do with that. The kid made the wrong cut in a free flow game. Okay. And he was like, "You got to see this. You got this." But he was on him. He wasn't telling him he was a piece of crap. He was telling him, "You got this." He was on him because he deserved it. Coaches, and parents, listen, that's one of the things. You asked a question in the beginning a little bit about, like, is it important to look at the development? Look at the way that coaches develop number 20 on the roster. If you go on a recruiting visit and you've got a kid who's got a pitcher, he's got 8 innings, right? He's got a 7.4 ERA sitting on that roster. Have your kid ask him, "Hey, what's your plan right now?" "Well, I don't know. I just go through bullpens by myself with the equipment manager." That'll tell you a lot. If the head coach is in that thing working with them just like they are their ace, that should tell you a lot too.
I think that's a very, very big deal that gets oftentimes swept under the rug. We don't really take a look at how the coaches coach the entire roster, throughout the
Yep.
calendar year. I think that's a big deal when it comes to choosing a college or a university. I want to say thank you to Dr. McCabe. He was nice enough to. This is a busy man. This is an extremely busy man. We're talking
I'll
about.
always come on and talk with
Yeah,
you.
well,
Coach.
I appreciate your time, and I know parents that have sent me a list of questions, but I really want to let parents know, how do they get in touch with you? I mean, are they going to follow you on Twitter? Are they going to send you a DM?
All
Tell
the
a
above.
parent or a student athlete, how can they reach out to Dr. Bhrett?
Look, and this is one of the cool things that we're starting. So you can follow me on any social media at Dr. Bhrett McCabe. It's BHRETT MCCABE. But after the new year, we built a studio behind the house. We're going to have a new thing called Mental Game Live. It's a couple times a month. It's going to be a show, just like
Love
you
it.
would see on TV. The show is based on the concepts and understanding of the mental game. It's a subscription model, but it is so cheap it's sickening. Okay, and the reason for that is that I understand that we have a dearth, we have a need, we have a gap for people to understand the mental game. And because I do a lot of work with professional athletes, I do a lot of work with college. I can't see everybody who comes through my program. I have other people in my office that see people, and they're brilliant. But I want to get the material out there, and so this is a program. Mental Game Live would be on demand, live, whatever, to help people understand, like, hey, do you understand the psychological development that is required to play and moving up? And so those are the things that I want you to do and take a look for.
Well, what I want to let everyone know is at the completion of today's episode, and at the bottom of this particular episode, I'm going to put the contact information as far as social media is concerned. I'm going to have the links, the Amazon links for the 4 books that I am aware of that Dr. McCabe wrote and would recommend. So that way you have access to Dr. McCabe. And when that television program, that content breaks, I'll make sure that I'm promoting it, not only here on the YouTube channel, but all of my social media, because I believe strongly in Dr. McCabe as a dad with my sons. And so I think it's important to share that with parents, because I think it's an integral part. I know it's an integral part of development, regardless of whether you're a student athlete. Just in today's world, you need to have an awareness with regard to mental health. Dr. McCabe, I thank you so much for your time today. It's enjoyable and refreshing to hear your candor and all of the stories that you share with us on an ongoing basis. Thank you very much for your time, and happy holidays, buddy.
Happy holidays to you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.